Welcome back, dear night traveler, to Whispers of History, the quietest corner of the internet where the past hums softly and time itself slows down. If your eyes are heavy and your brain is craving something as soothing as a warm cup of chamomile but slightly more informative, you've come to the right scroll. Tonight, we'll take you somewhere dry, dusty, and weirdly punctual. You're about to step into a city long lost beneath layers of sand and speculation. A place where the shadows of flowers told people when to eat lunch. Yes, really. So before you inevitably doze off mid-century, go ahead and gently tap that like button, it won't mind. If you're still conscious, leave a comment with your current location and the time right now. It's always fun to see who's drifting off from where. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You stand at the edge of a desert that doesn't seem to end, where the wind is always slightly sarcastic and the air tastes faintly of crushed limestone and yesterday's regrets. The heat isn't cruel, it's just passive-aggressively consistent. No drama, just relentless sun. Your boots crunch against sand that once lined polished stone streets. Somewhere beneath your feet there used to be a city, not a grand empire, not a gilded palace, just a city. Quiet, clever, and very into flowers. They called it a name that only appears twice in surviving texts, and once in a folk song involving goats and a possibly fictional princess. Its coordinates are still debated by archaeologists, but the consensus is that it probably existed, and it was probably somewhere between modern-day Jordan and a place your GPS refuses to recognize. You walk forward past the ghost of what might been a marketplace. There are no ruins left to market, but your imagination is generous tonight. You picture small stalls with linen shades, pomegranate juice being ladled out of clay pots, and a man yelling far too loudly about fish despite being nowhere near a coast. Here's the part that sets apart. They told time using flower shadows, not just sundials, actual flower petals. The citizens built shallow bowls in the plazas, filled them with water, and planted single flowers whose shadows would move predictably throughout the day. It's beautifully impractical. Historians still debate whether the system was actually functional or mostly ceremonial. Kind of like that treadmill you own, but only used to hang clothes. As you walk through this imagined city, you pass one of those bowls. The water has long since evaporated, and the flower is a memory. But you can almost feel the stillness of a late morning centuries ago, when the shadow of a marigold would tell you it's time for the baker's third batch. It's an obscure tidbit of the night. The flower most often used was calendula, believed to bloom exactly at sunrise and droop at sunset. Locals swore by it, though modern botanists roll their eyes. Still, there's something gentle about the idea, a whole town moving in rhythm with something so soft and alive. You keep walking. The silence doesn't press in. It drapes itself around you like a silk scarf someone left in a museum too long. You probably won't make it through this day. You turn a corner, imaginary of course, and find yourself on a narrow stone lane. It smells faintly of cinnamon and hot rock, like someone baked cookies in a volcano and then politely vanished. The scent lingers, as do the feelings. That's how worked. Everything was subtle but oddly emotional. It was a city that didn't shout, it whispered. The street beneath your feet was once called the Road of Second Thoughts, not because people had doubts, but because they came here when they wanted to. People changed professions here, traded goats for books, or fell in love with someone inconvenient. Sometimes all three in the same afternoon. Today, the only thing left is a line of foundation stones so symmetrical you suspect someone obsessive laid them. Likely a man named, who was, according to one faded scrap of text, a bricklayer with the discipline of a priest and the temperament of a wind chime. The Road of Second Thoughts was also famous for its time garden, a square where different types of flowers marked different hours. Unlike the single flower shadow method in the plazas, this one was a bit more ambitious and probably less accurate. Marigold at 9 a.m., Blue Lotus at noon, and this part gets debated. A carnation for when it was socially acceptable to start drinking. There's something charming about an entire society not agreeing on what hour it is, but nodding politely as long as someone's flower is pointing vaguely west. You pause in front of what might been a tea seller's booth. A ceramic shard pokes from the sand, too perfectly curved, too smooth to be natural. Maybe it once held cardamom tea, or pickled dates, or dice made of goat knuckles. You'll never know, and that's part of the lull. An obscure fact, the citizens of believed that yawning near the calendula plants could disrupt the shadow rhythm. So morning naps were strictly taken indoors. There's no written punishment for it, but one sarcastic carving implies someone was once exiled for a particularly loud yawn. Historians still argue over whether this time garden was literal, poetic, or simply symbolic, like most of modern life. But as you sit on a warm step and pretend not to yawn yourself, the flower shadows stretch out again in your imagination. The petals don't mind your presence. They just keep turning with the sun, quiet and forgiving. And then somewhere far off, maybe there's still one shadow left, waiting for you to notice. You've walked far enough now that the sun in your mind is starting to soften. Not that it was ever harsh, this isn't the kind of story where anything scorches. It's just that the light now seems slower, sliding sideways over smooth stone like honey down a cool bowl. You arrive at what was once known as the Whispering Hall, though the name might been ironic. Had a thing for irony in case you hadn't noticed. There's no roof left, of course. Just 4 cracked walls leaning in slightly like old friends in a gentle argument. You step inside and notice how the air feels different here, cooler, more thoughtful, like it's remembering something without needing to speak. Legend says that sound in this chamber could travel from one end to the other without raising your voice. Just a murmur would do. Not for dramatic secrets or war councils, this wasn't that kind of place, but for things like, do you think the calendula is drooping early? Or yes, the lentils have come in tonight. The acoustics were allegedly an accident. The byproduct of an architect named who was trying to design a circular bakery and didn't understand math. The result was an oblong, echo-prone room that was immediately repurposed into something more spiritual. Because that's what people do when buildings surprise them. One man, a retired goat tax collector, used to come here every day just to sit and listen. Not for voices or messages, but for the way the air moved when no one spoke. He claimed it carried the thoughts of the flowers. That calendulas whispered secrets, and if you sat long enough, they would tell you something worth waiting for. Historians still debate whether was eccentric, poetic, or just extremely bored. You sit on one of the low stone benches that ring the hall. They're weathered, sure, but still here, still doing their job. You close your eyes. In the real world, maybe you're lying in bed, your phone screen dimming. In this world, you're somewhere older than anything that needs charging. A soft wind brushes your cheek, imaginary or otherwise. It smells like rosemary and red dust. Somewhere behind you, a calendula shadow moves across a faded tile. An obscure detail, the benches were carved with tiny grooves to help rainwater channel off easily, but one of them was intentionally designed not to drain. It formed a little puddle each time it rained so bees could land and drink. The city's architects left an inscription, "For the visitors with wings." Not everything old has to be complicated. Now you don't speak, you just sit. The hall doesn't need your voice, it needs your quiet. You continue your walk not because you're in a hurry, but because movement feels good in this place. Like your feet have their own memory and your job is just to follow. Down a sloping lane, past a crooked tree that shouldn't still exist but does, and toward the scent of something faintly sweet, warm air, toasted flour, and the last moment before something burns. You've reached the remnants of what was once called the bakery that burned nothing. Which, of course, is a lie. It's everything burns eventually. But the name stuck mostly because the baker here, an old woman named, had a way of watching her ovens like she was listening for a song. She didn't time things by the flower shadows or the bells or even her own wrinkled instincts. She timed them by the shifting scent of the dough itself. The building is long gone, but you see the outline of a hearth. Flat stones that once held bread, a bit of melted glass from a window that may have faced east. You kneel and brush your hand against the ground, still warm but only in the memory sense. Well, here's your major historical fact: had a 4-bread calendar. Every week, a different type of bread was baked for 4 days, each symbolizing a season. The 5th day was fasting. The 6th was soup. The 7th was for laughing at people who still ate soup on fast days. This last one is not confirmed. The breads were simple, flat, seeded, often baked over hot stones. But one was made with crushed calendula petals, honey, and a rare root that only grew near the city's western edge. It was eaten only on flower night. The first evening the petals cast no shadows at dusk. Nobody's quite sure when that was, or why. Historians still argue whether was food, medicine, or just a charming excuse to use expensive ingredients before they rotted. You sit on the imaginary bakery stoop. The breeze carries a smell you can't name but makes you think of rain on wheat. Somewhere is watching a loaf and nodding once, not now, not yet, almost. An obscure cultural gem. Bakers wore no shoes on holy days, claiming the bread could feel the tension through their heels. One rebellious apprentice wore sandals once and his dough collapsed in shame. According to legend, the bread just gave up. You rest here for a while. The sun in your mind dips lower, and you feel full in a way that has nothing to do with eating. Remember that flour bowl from earlier. Its shadow now reaches the edge of the bakery wall. And that means, wherever you are, it's probably time to slow down just a bit more. You stay until the light fades. You return to the path, though you never really left it. That's the nature of directions, are more about feelings than compass points. If you think about turning right, the world quietly adjusts. If you want to go back, it lets you. But now, your feet carry you forward toward a structure that shouldn't exist anymore but of course does. Before you, a wide stone wall stretches across what might once been the city's northern edge. Not defensive, was rarely invaded, possibly because it didn't have anything particularly worth stealing. Unless you were extremely into flower shadows. No, this was the counting wall. But unlike tally marks or abacuses, this wall had no numbers, just hundreds, maybe thousands of tiny indentations. Each shallow dip in the stone represented something. No one's exactly sure what: births, market trades, days without arguments. Historians still debate it, mostly late at night over wine they pretend is for research. You reach out and touch one of the dimples. It's smooth, polished by centuries of weather and the bored fingers of. It feels like a question, not urgent, just wondering. The city's storytellers used to say the wall counted things that mattered when no one was watching. A dropped coin, a kind gesture, the silence after a song ends, the moments in between. A strange inscription curves along the base, written in a dialect now only partially translated. It reads roughly, "The wall remembers what we forget on purpose." Which sounds lovely until you realize it might be about taxes. You walk along the length of it. The indentations grow deeper near the center, then shallower again, like a heartbeat or a breath held and slowly released. Here's your obscure detail. Children used to play a game here called touch and tell. You press your finger into any one of the stone dips and say the first memory it gave you. If it made someone laugh, you got a piece of honey glass candy. If it made someone cry, you had to give yours away. You run your fingers along 4 or 5 of the dimples, not stopping to speak. You don't have to. The wall isn't keeping score, not anymore. As you reach the far end, you notice a faded mural, just a trace. Poppies, hands, a small table with 2 chairs and no one sitting. Maybe it meant something, maybe it still does. The sun leans lower now, and the flower shadows grow longer. You cross a low ridge beyond the counting wall and find yourself in what remains of the city's northern fields. The soil is long dead. But in your mind, rows of wild calendula still sway in the breeze like yellow flags of a kingdom that preferred naps to warfare. Here stood the house of the kite man, though calling it a house is generous. It was more of a platform, half shade, half sky. a tangle of bamboo, canvas, and contraptions that made the local elders nervous. The man's name was, and he had one belief: time belongs to the wind. He built kites, dozens of them. Big ones shaped like birds, small ones like leaves. Some were weighted with seeds to scatter across the fields, others painted with lines that shimmered when spun. But his most famous kite, if legend is to be believed, was the one he claimed could catch a moment. That kite was never recovered. Some say it was torn apart in a storm. Others say it was buried with him when he died, wrapped around him like a cocoon of hours. This theory, if it can be called that, was that a properly tuned kite could detect the most peaceful moment of the day, the exact second when the wind slowed just enough to let time catch its breath. He called this the flutter point. Supposedly, when his kite hit it, it would stop moving entirely, as if suspended outside the usual laws. Historians still debate whether the kite ever flew, but a drawing remains, carved on the inside of a broken pot in the city's southern district. A man, arms outstretched, holding a string that disappears into the sky, his face turned toward something we'll never see. An obscure cultural note: kites weren't just toys or tools. They were considered messages for the weather. People would write wishes on tiny bits of cloth, tie them to the tails, and let the wind decide whether the sky was in a generous mood. If your kite crashed, it meant try again tomorrow. You sit on the edge of the platform. The breeze is real here somehow. It tugs gently at your clothes, plays in your hair, hums softly in your ear. Not a whisper, just a suggestion. The flower shadows down in the city now stretch like long sighs, brushing against old doorways and market paths. Somewhere you imagine's last kite still floating, caught forever in that perfect breath of wind. Never rising, never falling, just waiting. Though the moment feels still enough to last forever. And maybe it will. Now you're standing before a doorway made of cracked red stone and stubborn vines. It leans a little too far left, like someone tried to build it while thinking of something else entirely. There's no plaque. No inscription, just a faint smell of paper and dust that shouldn't be there anymore. This was the library of wind-sorted thoughts, which is a poetic way of saying no one really knew where anything was. Inside, the shelves were deliberately uneven. Scrolls were tucked into corners based on the wind's direction the day they were written. The librarians, if you could call them that, claimed the system worked perfectly. You didn't find the book you were looking for. You found the one you needed. You step inside. The air is thick with that ancient library smell, half-dried ink, half-damp sandalwood, and a memory of someone humming in the next room. The floors are stone, etched not with symbols or language, but with swirling wind patterns mapped over decades. Supposedly, if you stood in just the right spot on the right day, the floor would tell you what to read. It never told anyone twice. You trail your fingers along a row of shelves, some warped, some half-eaten by time. There's a faint breeze impossibly, and one scroll tumbles gently from a ledge and lands at your feet. It's wrapped in faded yellow ribbon and sealed with the image of a flower, a calendula, naturally. You open it, the ink is nearly gone, but one line is still legible. At midday, the shadow will point to the answer. Ask only if you're ready to know. You decide not to ask. Here's your historical fact. Was one of the few ancient cities known to have rotating scribes. Every season, the scribes would change writing styles, ink colors, and even narrative structure to reflect the moods of the wind. Spring scrolls were poetic. Summer scrolls were blunt. Autumn scrolls contained lots of ellipses. Winter scrolls were mostly silent. Historians still argue whether the rotation was philosophical or just chaotic artistry. Or perhaps the scribes were just bored and liked changing fonts. Who could blame them? This obscure detail, one librarian of the East Tower once wrote a love story in a wind gust pattern across 117 scraps of bark. The bark was scattered across the shelves, only readable when stacked in order on a windy hill. No one has ever found more than 42 pieces. Or the hill. You sit in a dusty alcove feeling the wind shift. You don't need a book, you're in one. As outside, the calendulas turn slightly in the breeze, casting their quiet, soft-edged shadows across the stone. You're part of it now. You step out of the library and into what feels like a forgotten clearing, an open stone plaza that doesn't quite make sense on the map. Which is fair, since never liked maps much. The city grew the way plants do, organically, stubbornly, and often in spirals. This was known as the Circle of the Unnamed Days. A space dedicated not to festivals or holidays, but to those odd in-between days that didn't seem to belong anywhere. You know the ones, the Tuesdays that feel like Thursdays, the mornings that begin at 3 p.m., the afternoons when even time seems to shrug and say, "Not sure what this is really." The plaza is made of concentric rings of limestone, each with faint markings, symbols no one's fully translated. Some say they're just wind diagrams. Others believe they're fragments of unspoken songs etched by barefoot dancers who never repeated a step. You walk across the rings slowly, barefoot now, because it feels right. The stone is warm but not hot, like it's been thinking about sunlight for a few hours and decided to keep some for itself. With every step, the breeze shifts direction slightly, as if the air is adjusting to your presence. Here's your major historical fact. Officially removed 11 days from its lunar calendar, claiming they served no purpose except to make people feel guilty for resting. The government, such as it was, simply declared these days. No tasks, no taxes, no expectations, just quiet. People used to gather here on those days. Not for rituals, not for speeches, just to be. You can still feel the echo of that gentle rebellion rest as resistance. A refusal to measure worth by what gets done. This obscure cultural moment. On the longest unnamed day of the year, citizens would bring clocks, sundials, and hourglasses into the circle and turn them upside down or bury them completely. Children were told that time went underground on those days to dream. One child allegedly dug up an hourglass 20 years later and claimed it whispered his future in reverse. No one believed him, except his sister, who said he was always a little strange anyway. Historians still debate whether the calendar edits were a genuine civic decision or just an elaborate joke gone too far. You sit now at the center of the circle. The wind has gone still, not silent, just settled. Around you, the flower shadows pause, uncertain. Maybe today doesn't belong to the others. Maybe this is one of the unnamed ones. No pressure. You close your eyes, and the plaza breathes with you. You follow the curve of an alleyway that seems to pull you forward like a question you've been meaning to ask for years. There's a breeze at your back, carrying the scent of old brass and something faintly metallic, like the memory of a bell that once rang softly and never quite stopped. You arrive at what's left of a small shop. The sign, half buried in vines, reads simply, "If it ticks, I'll fix it." This was the home of the city's only known clockmaker, which is funny because didn't actually believe in time. He built clocks, yes, dozens of them. Some tall and reverent, others tiny enough to hide in a bead of amber. But none of them ever worked quite right. Some ran too slow, some didn't tick at all, and one only moved backward, but only when no one was looking. Insisted this was intentional. He believed time wasn't linear or circular or even particularly interested in us. Time, he once told a traveler, is a shy cat that only curls in your lap once you stop chasing it. You step inside the ruins of his workshop. Gears are scattered like forgotten breadcrumbs. A half-assembled sundial sits in the corner, its gnomon bent at what must have been a very optimistic angle. There's a clock face carved from bone too smooth, too round, and a tiny, elegant hourglass where the sand runs sideways. You reach for a small copper piece near your foot and flip it in your hand. It's weightless, probably because it isn't real, and maybe that's the point. Here's your historical fact. Clocks were considered ceremonial gifts, not to tell time, but to mark the refusal to let time boss anyone around. Brides received clocks with no hands. Scholars were given timepieces with identical numerals all around the edge, 12 12s or 4 endless 9s. An obscure fact, on the last day of the harvest would march through the streets with a wagon full of broken clocks, handing them to children and asking, "What time does your heart say it is?" No two answers were ever the same. He kept every one of them written on strips of palm bark. A few still survive. Historians still argue whether was a philosopher, an anarchist, or just very, very bad at engineering. You sit at the bench where he used to work. The chair creaks under you, though maybe that's just your imagination being helpful. Outside, the calendulas shift, their shadows stretching across a window pane where no glass remains. I'll take. Oh, then nothing. Well, would have liked that. You leave the workshop with the lingering scent of dust and brass clinging to your clothes. The path winds gently now, bordered by low hedges that might once have been carefully tended or perhaps never were. The city has a way of blurring those lines. You walk slowly, feeling the wind lift your thoughts like laundry on a lazy afternoon. You arrive at the Garden of Forgotten Names, though the people of never actually called it that. They simply referred to it as the place where we go when we do know what to say. It's quiet here, but not the heavy kind. This silence has space in it, soft edges, like the hush between two close friends who run out of words and don't need to find more. The garden is oval-shaped, ringed by silver-leafed trees whose fruit never ripened but always smelled like childhood. You wander past rows of stone benches and mossy patches. In the center, a wide circle of ground is covered in dark pebbles. This is where people came to sit when they needed to be no one for a little while. No names, no tasks, just breathing. Here's your historical fact. Once a year during the lunar drift season, citizens would gather here and wear blank masks made of thin clay. They'd sit together in silence for an hour, then leave without speaking. No ceremony, no music, just the ritual of being unspoken. As obscure tradition, each person would press a single finger into a patch of soft mud before they left, a fingerprint for no one in particular. The mud was later baked into tiles and buried in secret places around the city. One was found under the bakery stoop, another beneath the counting wall. One, some say, was found in the middle of a calendula bowl, perfectly pressed and perfectly still. You sit now at the edge of the pebble ring. The wind nudges your hair. There are no signs, no directions, no explanations, just a whisper of lavender in the air and the warm pull of forgetfulness. Historians still debate whether the garden was a sacred site, a quiet rebellion, or simply a place with very comfortable benches. You lean back. The sky, as imagined, turns a soft gray blue like the last page of a very good book. You're no one here, but in the best way, the freeing way. The way that lets you rest without explanation. The flower shadows reach across your lap, touch your hands, then drift away. You don't need to remember anything right now. That's what this place is for. The sky overhead has changed just slightly. Not enough for alarm, doesn't do drama, but enough that you notice. The light feels cooler now, as if dipped in silver or softened by clouds that never quite make it into view. You follow a path paved with round stones, each one worn smooth like knuckles resting in the earth. Ahead stands a single boulder, too large to move, too smooth to be accidental. It's shaped like an ear pressed gently against the sky. The citizens called it the moonstone, though it was neither precious nor particularly rare. As it didn't shine, it didn't glow. But it sang. It's only on some nights. Only when the moon was full and the calendula shadows vanished completely. Locals claimed that if you placed your palm against the stone and closed your eyes, you could hear a hum, low, melodic, and mournful. Like the moon missing something it couldn't name. No one ever wrote down the song. You place your hand on the stone. It's cool to the touch but not cold. Like someone just finished telling it a story and it hasn't quite let go of the ending. You wait, the wind hushes. The shadows pause. And then maybe you feel it. A vibration, subtle as breath, as though the stone is remembering something important and letting you eavesdrop just a little. Here's your historical fact. The moonstone was used in agricultural rituals. Farmers would gather here before planting, not to pray but to listen. They believed the tone of the stone predicted the coming season. Deep tones meant rain, high tones meant wind, and no sound at all meant time to wait. This obscure practice. On certain nights, newlywed couples would come here in silence and sit back to back against the stone. If they both heard the same melody, it meant their hearts were in rhythm. If they didn't, well, they usually came back the next month and tried again. Historians still debate whether the stone's hum was geological, spiritual, or just a trick of wind and wishful thinking. But as you sit there, letting your heartbeat match the silence, you wonder if maybe, just maybe, the moon has a favorite rock. And this is it. Though the breeze returns, soft as string music, you open your eyes, nothing has changed. And somehow everything has. From the stone, a path curls gently down through a grove of spindly trees, their branches thin as ink lines drawn in haste. You follow it. There's no reason not to. The ground is uneven in a comforting way, like an old quilt laid out over memory. You arrive at the bridge that led nowhere, which is exactly what it sounds like. A stone bridge spanning a dry ravine and ending in a field. There's no other side, just wildflowers, occasionally goats, and on very rare days, nothing at all. It was built by Sen Tal, an architect who believed that not all structures needed function. Some needed only feeling. He spent 5 years carving the arches, selecting stones by texture and tone, until the bridge hummed slightly when walked upon like a string plucked by the earth. People crossed it anyway, for reflection, for solitude, for the sheer thrill of arriving nowhere in particular. You step onto it now. The stones are smooth underfoot, worn by centuries of feet and maybe a few hooves. As you walk, the wind rises around you, not sharp, not loud, just attentive, like it's curious about your direction. Here's your historical fact. Every equinox, citizens would walk the bridge in single file, each person holding a single calendula bloom. They'd toss the flower off the end, not to let go of something, but to mark a moment that didn't need meaning. It was called crossing into stillness. An obscure tidbit, on the summer solstice, children would sneak across the bridge at midnight and sit at the edge, telling each other imaginary stories about where the bridge might have gone if it had wanted to. One favorite tale was that it led to a valley where time unraveled itself like ribbon and everyone got to relive their happiest mistake. No adults ever found the place, but the children said it smelled like peach skins and thunder. Historians still argue whether the bridge was once part of an unfinished road, a ceremonial path, or a very elaborate prank. You sit at the end now, your feet dangling above wild time and silence. There's nothing ahead, no towers, no gates, no task waiting at the finish line. And it's perfect. Behind you, the flower shadows fall in rows across the bridge stones, like the fingers of a pianist mid-chord. The song ends, but no one claps. You close your eyes, and the bridge holds your pause like a promise. You return from the bridge slowly, retracing your steps not with purpose but with permission. The ground seems more forgiving now, the air a bit more curious. As you walk, the scent of warm spices and worn cloth begins to settle in around you. Not intense, just there like a conversation in the next room. You arrive at the market of no exchange. A strange name for a place that once teemed with people but not with commerce. Here no coins changed hands, no weights were measured. No bartering, no bargains, just rows of fabric canopies and stalls, each one offering something, but only if the giver felt like giving. This was a market of stories, of advice, of second-hand spoons and first drafts of poems. You might arrive with nothing and leave with a dried calendula tucked behind your ear and a recipe for onion stew recited from memory by a man who claimed to have once cooked for a goat festival. You walk past where the stalls used to be. The outlines are faint now, just impressions in the dust. But you imagine the faded colors, the gentle shouts, the laughter that didn't need volume. One stall had only mismatched shoes, another gave away broken flutes, and one, always the last on the right, handed out dreams, not real ones, paper ones, tiny scrolls tied with thread, each one bearing a sentence like "You will forget something important, and it will be the best thing that ever happened." Here's your historical fact. The market of no exchange ran on a communal system of memory. Each participant agreed to carry a gift they had received by remembering it well and telling someone else days or years later what it meant. The idea was that gifts lived longer when they were talked about. This obscure custom, on the day of high winds called the unfolding, vendors would release unsold items into the air on silk cloths. Whatever the wind carried farthest was declared most needed by someone unseen. There's a local tale of a ladle that flew for 3 days and landed in a riverbank, only to be found by a traveler who used it to start a soup cart. That cart, they say, later fed the children who invented touch and tell at the counting wall. Historians still debate whether this market was economically sustainable or just an elaborate excuse to give away mismatched socks. You sit on what was once a vendor's step. A breeze curls around you and smells faintly of mint and lentils. In the distance, the shadows of calendulas line up along the road like spectators, watching without judgment. You close your eyes, no one asks for anything. And still, you leave with more than you came for. As the imaginary sun begins to bow a little deeper, you wander toward the eastern edge of the city, though east in is more of a polite suggestion than a fixed direction. The ground here shifts from stone to pale sand, and your feet sink ever so slightly as you walk. Not in effort, in softness. Ahead, near the edge of a forgotten streambed, stand the remains of the Lantern Pavilion, a structure more delicate than its name implies. Made from branches, reeds, and the occasional feather, the pavilion was rebuilt every season, not because it fell apart, but because that was the point. It housed hundreds of sky lanterns, small spheres of rice paper, dried calendula petals, and hollow bones from winged birds, a type of swallow now believed to be extinct. But these lanterns held no flame. They rose instead by catching warm air pockets generated by chants, long tonal vocal harmonies sung by the elders and echoed by children. No one understood how it worked. They didn't try to, it just did. You approach the edge of the pavilion. There's nothing left but a circle of worn posts and fragments of yellow paper buried in the dirt. You kneel and pick up a half-lantern base. It still smells faintly of cedar and something, maybe ginger. Here's your historical fact. Used these lanterns to carry confessions. Not sins, not secrets, just small, private truths. People wrote them on the lantern's paper using flower ink, lavender, sage, crushed beet, and let them rise into the dusk. If the lantern disappeared into the sky, it meant someone else somewhere had the same thought. If it spun in place or sank, it meant it was yours alone, and that was sacred too. An obscure tidbit, on the third day of the windless week, a rare seasonal lull, children would try to catch the floating lanterns with butterfly nets and read aloud the confessions in sing-song voices. No one was embarrassed. Most of the confessions were lovely things like, "I once pretended to be asleep just to hear my father sing a song twice." Historians still argue whether the lift mechanism was thermal, spiritual, or just unacknowledged science passed down from a civilization even older. You sit on a fallen beam. The sky above you glows a pale, imaginary gold. You imagine a single lantern rising, carrying a thought not even you knew you had. Though the wind is still just enough. The flower shadows stretch toward the horizon, as if reaching for one more lantern to guide home. You let the stillness stay a while longer. You walk now through a narrow, vine-draped corridor, one of those forgotten passageways that exists mostly out of politeness. The city lets you pass, though it doesn't seem entirely sure where you're going. That's all right. Neither are you. As eventually, the corridor opens into a tall, octagonal chamber. No roof, no doors, just open sky above and a circular platform in the center surrounded by tilted columns carved with spirals. The room was known simply as the Measure. This is where the people came to watch the sky move. Not for omens, not for star charts or prophecies, just for rhythm. The platform's surface is covered in concentric circles made from different stones, dark granite, pale sandstone, flecks of shell. Each ring marked a different phase of the sky's color: dawn blush, midday silver, sunset indigo, and the eerie green-gray that sometimes hovered just before a storm. Though the idea was simple, stand in the center and turn slowly until the sky matched the right ring. Then stop. And that was your time. No clocks, no bells, just your eyes, your breath, and the way the world above you changed shade by shade. You walk to the platform and step gently onto the first ring. The wind here is absent, like even it is unsure whether to disturb this place. You look up. The sky, real or imagined, is a soft watercolor wash. A blue with just a bit too much sleep in it. You pause, you turn slowly. And somewhere around the third ring, the sky seems to nod in agreement. Here's your historical fact. Used sky color to schedule public events. Not by hour but by hue. A gathering might be announced as after third silver or during the choral fade. Everyone understood. It was a system that required patience and excellent eyesight. An obscure tradition, on days when the sky refused to cooperate, when it stayed a stubborn gray or turned a color no one had a name for, city officials declared it an ambiguous day. These were celebrated with surprise naps, random storytelling, and large pots of communal lentils. No questions allowed. Historians still debate whether the entire sky measuring practice was observational science, or just a very beautiful way to avoid punctuality. You lie back now on the fourth ring. The stone is warm beneath you, like someone left it out in the sun just for you. As above, the clouds slide slowly, not in a hurry. One of them looks like a calendula petal. Or maybe that's just wishful seeing. Either way, it's beautiful. And either way, it's time. Leaving the measure, your feet follow a path that no longer pretends to be straight. It meanders, loops, wanders sideways for a while, and then, without warning, opens into a wide, flat expanse of earth. There are no buildings here. No columns, no stones, no artifacts. Just the wind-blown imprint of what once was the field of waiting. Though this was not a queue, not a station. People didn't gather here to wait for something. Though they came to wait with something. It's an emotion they weren't ready to feel. A decision they weren't ready to make. A name they'd forgotten or a memory that hadn't finished becoming itself. The field was a companion, not a solution. The ground beneath your feet is soft and finely cracked. The kind of soil that remembers footprints long after they're gone. You imagine people standing here, not in lines, not facing anything in particular, just standing or sitting, or lying back with arms spread as if they expected answers to fall like slow rain. I'll use a sit too. Though there's no pressure, the field doesn't ask why you're here. Now here's your historical fact. The field of waiting was officially designated non-sacred. A status invented by officials to prevent any rituals, structures, or expectations from taking root. The only rule was that no one could speak above a whisper. Children were allowed to hum, but only in certain tones. This obscure observation, a now-lost scroll, describes a man who stood in the same spot every dusk for 37 years holding a polished pebble. When asked why, he said only, "I'm waiting for the day it feels like mine." One evening, he left the pebble behind and never returned. The pebble disappeared the next morning. Historians still debate whether the field had rules at all, or if it was simply an accident of open space that people decided meant something. You lie down fully now. The soil cradles your weight gently without commitment. The calendula shadows don't reach here. Maybe they're waiting too. Overhead, the sky slides into a purple blue that doesn't yet have a name. While you close your eyes, and then the field waits with you, quietly and without questions. You wake, or maybe you never fully slept, still resting in the field of waiting. There's a quiet in your limbs, like even your muscles are thinking slower now. The sky has shifted again, deepened into that in-between indigo that doesn't signal night or day, just pause. You rise and follow a path that wasn't there before but now is. Tends to do that. It gives you what you need only after you've stopped asking. The path leads you to a wall. Not the counting wall, not a defensive wall, just a wall. Tall, curving, soft gray stone and most notably unfinished. It simply stops. Right in the middle of what should be a grand arc, like a sentence left mid-thought. Locals once called it the wall that forgot to finish. Some said the builders ran out of stone. Others said they were interrupted by a festival. A very small number whispered that the wall chose not to be completed, that some structures, like some people, were meant to remain in progress forever. You run your fingers along the stone. It's smooth but not polished, speckled with tiny bits of mica that catch light in lazy sparks. The edge where the building stopped is ragged, raw, not ruined, just paused. Here's your historical fact. The wall was intended to be part of a garden maze. Records suggest a plan for 7 walls, each representing a type of uncertainty: doubt, delay, regret, forgetting, misunderstanding, dreaming, and mishearing. Only the first one was ever built. An obscure local ritual. Once a year, people brought half-finished things to the wall. Unwritten letters, uncooked dough, half-knitted scarves. They'd lean them gently against the base and whisper something they hadn't told anyone, then they'd walk away. The wind took care of the rest. Historians still argue whether this wall had architectural significance, or if it was simply being, leaving a question mark in stone. You stand at its edge now, where the stone meets nothing. A calendula shadow brushes near your foot and turns, as if deciding it doesn't belong here. You sit, you wait, you don't finish anything. And for once, that's not a failure. It's a kindness. Your walk continues, not because you must, but because the city gently nudges you forward. The light is gold now, stretched long and low across the stones. You pass under an archway so worn it barely remembers being an arch and arrive at a small rectangular room. It has no name on the map, if there ever was a map. People just called it the room with one chair too many. You step inside. The walls are undecorated. The floor is plain. There's nothing spectacular about the space except for the fact that it holds 4 chairs for 3 people. Always 4, always 3 guests, never 2, never 5, and always 1 chair remained empty. And people came here for conversations, difficult ones. Breakups, reconciliations, proposals, farewells, agreements between neighbors, apologies between brothers. Whatever the topic, the rule was simple. 3 people entered, 4 chairs were arranged. 1 stayed empty. The 4th chair was never acknowledged, never moved. It simply sat, silent and still, like a witness with no pen and no judgment. You sit down now, not on the 4th chair, you wouldn't dare. You take one of the others, facing the empty one across a shallow beam of light. And for a moment you feel the room breathe around you, like it's waiting for something to be said or something to be forgiven. Here's your historical fact. Legal disputes were sometimes resolved here, but only the small ones, the emotional ones, not about money or land but about words. He said I lied. She stopped talking to me. We lost our way. No judges, just the fourth chair listening. An obscure custom. Some visitors brought food, small bowls of olives or figs, and left one piece on the empty seat. A symbolic offering maybe, or a snack for a ghost with good boundaries. One story tells of a man who came alone, set 4 chairs, and whispered all 4 parts of an old argument. Then he wept and left without taking any of the chairs down. The next morning the chairs were gone. No one ever found them. Historians still debate whether the 4th chair represented memory, regret, love, or the city itself. Or maybe it represented you now here, listening to a story you didn't know you needed. Well, you reach out and touch the back of the empty seat. Well, it doesn't move, but you feel heard. You leave the room with 1 chair too many and follow a trail of petals. Not fresh ones. They're pressed into the stone, fossilized impressions of calendulas that once lined this corridor like sleepy sentries. You walk until the sound of your own footsteps begins to disappear. The city, as usual, is doing its best to become quieter than you. Eventually, you reach a wide clearing encircled by bowed trees and old rope markers that once served as polite boundaries. In the center is a stone well. It's old, it's deep. But when you peer into it, you don't see yourself. No reflections. Not even darkness. Just nothing. The people have called it the listening well. It didn't give water. It didn't echo. It simply offered silence so pure it erased whatever you carried with you, just long enough for you to remember what else you were. You kneel beside it and look down again. Still nothing, not blackness, not shimmer, just an unmarked absence that feels strangely peaceful. Here's your historical fact. The listening well was one of only 3 places in where visitors were asked to remove their shoes. The others were a place of birth and a place of death. No one quite knows which this one was. An obscure ritual before exams or weddings or during particularly noisy heartbreaks, people would come here and drop a single word into the well. Not shout it, not whisper, just let it go. Names, emotions, apologies, sometimes even recipes. The belief was that the well took your word and returned it to you when you were ready to understand it. One story claims a woman once dropped the word "stay" into the well. She came back 3 years later to retrieve it, and changed her mind. Historians still debate whether the well was symbolic, spiritual, or just extremely deep and unusually absorbent. You sit back now on the ledge. The stone is warm against your spine. The wind doesn't move here, neither does time. You close your eyes and forget what you were trying to remember. Just for a moment. The well approves. From the well, the path becomes less a walkway and more a meander. It leads you through a grove of silver-barked trees, their leaves shaped like coins but worth nothing, except maybe the sound they make when the wind brushes through them. a sound like a sigh that took too long to form. You reach a slope and climb slowly, until it opens onto a semicircular arrangement of low stone seating. There is no stage, no curtain, no backdrop, just rows of stone benches arranged to face a blank field of open sky and swaying grass. Now this was the theater with no stage, and every seat was always full. The performances weren't enacted. They were observed, not by actors but by the world. You'd sit in silence and watch the clouds, or the breeze moving through long grass, or the shadow of a single calendula growing taller as the sun passed behind it. There were no programs, no applause, just you, time, and something outside yourself doing its best impression of meaning. You sit now on the third row, slightly left of center, where the view is said to be best during the golden hush. A moment just before sunset when everything looks like it's holding its breath. Here's your historical fact. The theater was built without measurements. Every stone was laid according to how it felt underfoot. Builders reportedly adjusted rows based on how their shoulders reacted to the slope. It was designed entirely by comfort, not calculation. Of obscure tradition, once a year the oldest person in the city would sit in the front row and simply fall asleep. This nap, known as the Dream performance, marked the official beginning of the resting season. Crowds gathered to watch them doze peacefully for as long as they liked. Sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 4 hours. Once the elder snored and the audience cried. The following year a statue was built in his honor. It looked very relaxed. Historians still debate whether the theater was philosophical performance art, or just a clever excuse for group napping. You recline now, hands behind your head, watching the sky do whatever it pleases. A bird passes, then a cloud, then somehow a leaf without a tree. A shadow passes over your hand, slender, soft-edged. A calendula reaching from somewhere unseen. Now you are the audience, and the show is exactly what you needed. You leave the theater with the quiet dignity of someone who's just seen a performance no one else will ever quite understand. The path leads you past more stone, more moss, more moments you almost remember. The wind picks up again, lazily twirling a thread of sunlight in the dust. You come to a clearing where a tower once stood, not tall, not grand, but remarkably odd. Even in its half-crumbled state, the design is clear. The windows face inward toward the center spiral. The balconies look toward each other. The doors open into walls. This was the backward tower. It was designed, quite literally, to face itself. From the outside, it resembled an unfinished silo. From the inside, it was a perfect spiral, a corkscrew of rooms, each meant for reflection. You didn't climb this tower to look out, you climbed to look in. Each level had a different function. The first was for forgetting. The second for remembering. The third for pretending neither of those things mattered. The fourth, if you ever made it that far, was a single chair and a mirror that didn't show your face unless you were laughing. You wander into what's left of the ground floor. The shape still holds. The stone curls inward. A hint of moss spirals up the walls, obedient to a geometry no longer enforced. You walk along the curve slowly, like you're trying to sneak up on yourself. Here's your historical fact. The backward tower was used as a rite of rest for scholars and record keepers who had reached the end of their service. They'd spend 7 days inside, writing nothing, reading nothing, and facing only themselves. They left with blank books, given not to document, but to absorb silence. An obscure tidbit, a poem carved near the top of the tower once read, "What lives behind your eyes waits where the stairs turn sharpest." No one knows who wrote it. Some believe it was the tower. Historians still debate whether the tower was a space of enlightenment, or simply the world's most sophisticated introvert corner. You sit on a fallen block, tracing the inner curve of the spiral with your eyes. There's no view, no vista, no reward. Except you feel seen. By something that doesn't need to look at you to understand. The sun, imaginary or otherwise, has lowered now to the place where it no longer casts shadows, only suggestions of them. You follow the gentle slope of a hill that seems to fold in on itself, until you arrive at what remains of a wide courtyard, ringed with broken benches and overturned dishes. This was the place of the flavorless feast, a communal table laid not with food but with meaning. Here once a month the people have gathered to eat identical flavorless meals. A thin porridge, a dry, unleavened bread, a tea that tasted like boiled patience. And every participant came wearing a simple cotton tunic dyed a shade known only as quiet white. Why? Because once a month they chose to experience nourishment with no distraction, no indulgence, no spice, no performance, just the act of sharing, stripped of everything but presence. Though the meal was never spoken about afterward. You walk to the center of the courtyard. A long stone table remains mossy and uneven. A spoon rests on one of the plates, forever waiting for the first or last bite. Ayusa said. You imagine the silence of the gathering, the sound of chewing, the sound of swallowing, the occasional clink of wood on clay, and underneath it all the most startling sound of all. No performances. Here's your historical fact. The feast without flavor originated during a 3-year drought when spices, fruits, and salt were rationed. Rather than mourn the loss, the citizens made a tradition of embracing absence, transforming it into something communal, contemplative, and oddly satisfying. A obscure anecdote. One year, a child accidentally brought a honeyed date to the feast. When he bit into it, every person at the table paused and smiled, but no one said a word. He later reported that it was the sweetest thing he ever ate, not because of the taste, but because no one made him feel guilty for forgetting. Historians still debate whether the tradition was spiritual fasting, or just the world's first recorded mindfulness retreat. You place your hands on the stone table. It's cool, familiar. There's a feeling that maybe this is what most dinners are missing, not seasoning but stillness. The calendula petal drifts by and lands in an empty bowl. And you feel full, without needing to explain why. You leave the feast behind unhurried, unburdened. There's a path leading east or west or somewhere in between. Never insists on precision. The stones underfoot feel more worn now, like you're walking on the slow spine of an idea that took too long to form but eventually became lovely anyway. The head nestled between the weathered roots of two lining trees, you see it. A door, freestanding, no walls, no hinges. Just a pale wooden rectangle set into a frame sitting politely in the middle of a clearing. Now this is the sideways door. It didn't open inward or outward, only sideways, sliding along a groove carved into the stone beneath it. No locks, no knob, just a quiet gliding motion that required both hands and no rush. It led to nothing, or everything, depending on who you asked. You step up to it, placing your palms on the smooth wood. It's worn to a buttery softness, like it's been touched 1,000 times by people who weren't in a hurry to go anywhere. While you slide it gently, behind it is just more clearing, but somehow it feels different now, like the world behind the door is listening more closely. Here's your historical fact. The sideways door marked the start of the year of pause, a sabbatical year declared once every generation. During that time, no new laws were passed, no buildings constructed, no public performances held. Instead, people were encouraged to open the door and simply walk until they felt ready to return. Some came back in hours, others years, one never did. A statue of her absence still stands near the marketplace. This obscure practice. On the last day of the pause year, everyone who had walked through the door left a single item behind: folded linen, a coin, a poem written in chalk, or sometimes just a breath blown softly toward the frame. It was said these offerings kept the door gentle. Historians still debate whether the door was ceremonial, symbolic, or a functional piece of very advanced emotional architecture. I'll slide the door shut. And just like that, the clearing feels a little more still. You walk into it anyway, now part of what lies beyond. The calendula shadows hesitate at the threshold. Then follow. You wander now through a grove of short, blue-stemmed trees that look like they were painted during someone's dream and left here by accident. The air has cooled again. Not cold, just careful. You feel like you're being watched, not with suspicion, but with quiet affection. Though there's a sound ahead, faint, not footsteps, not birds, just something repeating itself. You come to a small stone amphitheater carved into a hillside, no more than 6 rows deep, with vines hanging over the ledges like sleepy eavesdroppers. At the center, a smooth, low pedestal. Now, this place was known as the Chamber of Borrowed Echoes. User said, the stone hums faintly beneath you, not with vibration but with presence. Here, the city recorded sounds not of its own but of voices that had never been spoken aloud. Thoughts, hopes, private regrets. all somehow absorbed into the chamber, only to return when the world needed them again. People came here to hear something they didn't know they needed to hear. Not from others, but from themselves disguised as someone else. You place your hand on the pedestal. A voice not yours but strangely familiar echoes softly in your mind. You were never too late, you were just waiting for the right quiet. You don't flinch, the words settle into you somewhere below language. Here's your historical fact. The chamber was lined with thin reeds and hollow bones beneath the stone, amplifying ambient sound and creating strange, delayed echoes. These echoes often transformed mid-sentence, turning mundane speech into something curiously wise. A form of accidental poetry, some said. A technical error, others claimed. An obscure detail. Children believed the echoes were messages from older versions of themselves. Future selves who had grown up made mistakes and come back to whisper advice. They'd sit for hours, asking questions aloud and listening for replies that sounded too old to be imagined. Historians still debate whether the echoes were real phenomena or simply the result of suggestible minds inside excellent acoustics. You lie back on the lowest step. The sky has turned that shade of gold that doesn't last more than a few minutes. Another voice rises from the pedestal. You're not broken, you're just in the middle of changing shape. And it's exactly what you didn't know you needed. The echoes still linger in your bones, but they've grown quiet now. You rise, your body slower than before, not from exhaustion, but from deep agreement with the pace of this place. Doesn't ask you to keep up. It asks if you're ready to slow down more. You follow a path shaded by small, bowed trees with bark that flakes like pages from a forgotten book. The trail curves, turns, and then opens into a small glade you'd never have found unless you were being gently invited. There, beneath a flowering tree that drops petals like sighs, is a bench. Simple, stone, just wide enough for one person. Now this is the bench that waited for one specific person. And no one ever knew who it was waiting for. People sat on it, of course. Some claimed it warmed when they arrived, others said it cooled. A few swore they heard music, very faint, just behind their left ear. But most people simply sat, sighed, and left, convinced the bench wasn't meant for them. All user said, and the bench doesn't react. Or maybe it does, but in the way only you can feel. The way a blanket shifts when it finally accepts your weight. The way the wind seems to stop evaluating you. Here's your historical fact. Every citizen of was invited once in their life to visit this bench. The invitation came without a date, delivered by a child with no explanation. If the person was ready, they went. If not, the invitation dissolved in water. No second chances. A obscure local belief. It was said that when the true person sat on the bench, they would not remember their names, their past, or their purpose, but would remember exactly how it felt to be held by the earth without needing to impress it. No one ever claimed this had happened, but the bench remained. Historians still debate whether the bench was ceremonial or simply the most patient object ever constructed. You sit for a long time. The petals fall around you, a few landing in your lap like shy questions. The calendula shadows don't quite reach this far, but one tries, stretching itself toward the foot of the bench and stopping just short. Respectful. Oh, you don't ask if you're the one. Oh, you just sit. And the bench, whatever else it's done, doesn't move. Oh, it accepts you. The petals eventually guide you forward, gently dusting your shoulders with a soft suggestion of movement. You walk through a quiet arch of stone vines and arrive at a small tower you hadn't noticed before. It's no taller than 3 people standing on each other's shoulders. The windows are shuttered. The roof is open to the sky. And in the middle, hanging from a single bronze chain, is a clock. But not one with numbers. Not one with ticking. This is the clock that counted silences. It measured not seconds or hours, but spaces. Pauses between thoughts, gaps between sentences. The hush after someone says, "I don't know," and actually means it. These silences were weighted, treasured. You walk up the small spiral stairs and enter the chamber where the clock still hangs. It's round, golden, tarnished. The face bears no numbers, just a series of shapes. A ripple, a leaf, a pair of closed eyes, a single dot. Beneath it is a small ledger, open to the last recorded moment. The silence between the question and the choice. Wait 17 breaths. Here's your historical fact. This clock was once consulted before any major decision. Before weddings, before naming a child, before planting the first calendula of the season. The idea was simple. If the silence surrounding the decision was deep enough, then it was the right one. As obscure practice, the clock could only be activated by sitting in the room and saying nothing for as long as you could. It was believed that the length and quality of your silence would cause the hands to move. One man once sat for 3 days. The clock moved only one shape. He cried, thanked it, and left his shoes behind. Historians still debate whether the clock responded to stillness or simply to humidity, and the subtle shifts of time that live inside wooden walls. You sit now in the center of the room, watching the light catch the bronze. You say nothing. You don't even think very hard, you just breathe. Well, the hands shift. Just a little. And you feel it. You've been understood without having to explain anything. The calendula shadows stretch through the doorway now, finally catching up. They circle you like old friends. You stay until the silence feels heavier than sound. And then you stay a little longer. You descend from the silence clock tower like someone returning from a long, private conversation. The path below is moss-lined and overgrown in the most deliberate way, as if the earth here has decided that tidiness is unnecessary. At the end of this winding trail stands a small house, made of sun-bleached wood, glassless windows, and a crooked roof. It looks like a thought someone once had and forgot to finish. Vines curl around the door. Calendula bushes line its perimeter like loyal, sleepy pets. This is the house that locked itself from the inside. It's always been closed. No one has the key. No one claims to have lived there. And yet sometimes, only sometimes, there's a flicker of candlelight in the window, a sound of soft footsteps, the aroma of warm milk and cardamom drifting out through the cracks. Though the house was not abandoned, it was simply private. People came here not to enter, but to sit nearby, to lean against the wall, to feel the quiet press of a place that wanted no company but didn't mind being seen. You step onto the porch, the boards don't creak, the doorknob doesn't turn, you sit on the top stair and the wood warms slightly beneath you like it was expecting you. Here's your historical fact. City archives record no ownership for this house. And yet repairs were made, roof shingles replaced, windows re-oiled, door hinges soothed. Locals claimed the house fixes itself when it's feeling sociable. Others insisted a caretaker visited once every 10 years, but no one ever saw them. An obscure tradition, children would write notes, questions, poems, apologies, and slide them under the door. The next morning, the notes would be gone. Sometimes something would be returned, a pressed flower, a small wooden bead, or a folded piece of paper that simply read, "Yes." Historians still debate whether the house was a private retreat, a collective fiction, or the city's way of keeping a secret for itself. You lean back, the breeze here is thicker, slower, scented with bark and something sweet. The petals around the doorway don't fall, they float like they're thinking about it. You close your eyes, for a moment you're not a visitor. You're part of what the house is holding. Later minutes or maybe hours, you stand again and the path beneath your feet seems newly worn, like someone just walked it ahead of you. You follow it until the trees part and reveal a sunken courtyard half swallowed by ivy and slow-growing moss. In the center, a round chamber of stone, sunk halfway into the ground. Now this is the room of someone else. A place where people came when they needed to stop being who they were, just for a while. Not to escape, but to rest from the responsibility of being themselves. The door here is low, humble. You bow your head to enter. The interior is round, dim, and soft. Cushions line the wall in mismatched colors. In the center, a low table scattered with objects. A comb, a half-filled teacup, a single boot, a dried orange slice, a pair of spectacles with no lenses. Each item was left behind by someone who sat here as someone else. There are no names in this room, no introductions, no mirrors. You sit against the wall. The cushion is worn but not sad. The light filters through slats above like time deciding not to interrupt. Here's your historical fact. The room of someone else was the only place in where masks were allowed year-round. But they weren't costumes. They were simple blank cloth veils. People wore them not to hide, but to become temporary versions of a self they were curious about. Not lies, just experiments in softness. An obscure ritual, each visitor upon leaving would whisper a single sentence into a carved hole in the wall, known as the listening not me. That hole was sealed for centuries. When archaeologists tried to open it, they found it empty except for a faint smell of lavender and parchment. And one word etched in the stone behind it: maybe. Historians still debate whether this room was therapeutic, theatrical, or simply a way to give people a break from having to know themselves all the time. Now you reach toward the teacup, it's still warm. And for a moment, you are not yourself. You are someone who doesn't have to know anything. Not your plans, not your patterns, not even your favorite flowers. Well, you just are. And the city smiles quietly with you. You step outside the room of someone else and you do quite feel like yourself, but not in a frightening way. More like you've been polished at the edges, quietly rethreaded with gentleness. The air has changed again, a little cooler now, a little more knowing. Ahead lies a street, narrow and cobbled with uneven kindness. No signs, no intersections, just a single curving passage that seems to dip and sway as if remembering how to dance. Though this is the street that walked you back. No matter where you began in, if you wandered long enough, this street would eventually find you. You wouldn't notice it at first. Just that the light was warmer, the stones smoother, the walls closer together, like the city was hugging you home. You start to walk, or rather, you let yourself be walked. The street does most of the work. Your feet follow old grooves in the stone, worn not by carts or time, but by certainty. Everyone who walked this road eventually knew where they needed to return, even if it wasn't the place they started. Though the scent of rosemary, dust, and citrus peels wafts past, you pass doorways where windows flicker with memory light, murmurs behind shutters, a child's laugh, the sound of bread cooling. Nothing asks you to stop. Nothing asks you to remember. But everything recognizes you. Here's your historical fact. The street that walked you back was the first road laid in, paved even before the marketplace, the gardens, or the flower bowls. Built not to lead somewhere, but to guide people toward themselves, the version they hadn't seen in a while. This obscure tradition, when people felt lost, not geographically but emotionally, they were told to go walk the road until your shadow sighs. That was how you knew you were on it. The moment your shadow flickered forward instead of behind you, the street had found you. One recovered diary describes it as a road that remembers the shape of your silence. Now, historians still debate whether this was intentional city planning or just the magic of repetition and worn feet. You continue walking. The calendula shadows move beside you, no longer ahead or behind, just with you. And after a few more turns, the path opens up. Oh, and there it is. Though the heart of the city, though not a square, though not a monument, just a stillness you hadn't known you'd been walking toward all along. Well, you don't enter it, not yet. You stand at the edge of it, a single domed structure, round, soft-edged, like the last verse of a lullaby. No doors. No walls, just a gentle curve of space held up by pillars that lean slightly as though bowing toward each other in mutual understanding. Now this is the room that waited until you were ready. No one was ever taken here. You arrived only when you stopped trying to. It has no signs, no schedule, no ceremony. It's not a room that celebrates your arrival. It simply accepts it. While you step inside, the floor is smooth, pale, slightly warm, like it was made from sun-touched stone and long conversations. There's no furniture, no altar, just air and breath and time stretched thin enough to be folded into stillness. While you sit cross-legged in the center, and exhales, while you're not expected to speak, while you're not expected to understand, while you are only expected to be. Here's your historical fact. The room that waited was not documented in any civic records. It appeared in folk songs, in sketches on market walls, and once very faintly in the margin of a botanical guide about calendulas. But people who returned from it, if they spoke of it at all, said the same thing. I didn't go in, I arrived. An obscure tradition, on the third day of the blossom season, the oldest calendula plant in the city would begin to droop. Not from age, from timing, the first person to notice it and say nothing was said to be quietly invited to the room. No announcement, no nod, just understanding, one person, one moment, one sigh. Historians still debate whether the room was a physical location, a collective dream, or the city's final gift to those who listened long enough. Now you sit in the center now. And without effort, the silence gathers itself around you like a shawl. It doesn't matter what time it is. The clock that counts silences has already recorded this one. Somewhere far away but not too far, the flower shadows pause mid-stretch. And the sky, too, forgets what it was doing. While you breathe, and for the first time all day, while you don't have to go anywhere next. You rise from the room that waited, no rush, no need. The sky above is a gentle lavender, the kind of color that doesn't happen during day or night, but somewhere in between. Like a thought that wasn't meant to be shared, but ended up being beautiful anyway. Though the path ahead feels more like memory than stone, you follow it instinctively. And soon you come to a window, a single wooden frame propped upright in the middle of a circular platform. No building attached, no walls, just the frame, clean and straight, as if someone sliced it from a home that no longer needs a house. Well, this is the window that showed a different past. While you approach and look through, but you don't see your life replayed. This window doesn't deal in reruns. What you see instead is a version of your past if you'd been kinder to yourself. As if you'd taken the nap. So I said no when it would mattered. So I said yes when your heart whispered it. As if you'd asked for help or let someone wait beside you in silence, instead of pushing through on your own. Though the window does not accuse, it does not correct. It offers us a quiet possibility, gently framed, nothing more. Well, you don't need to cry, but you can. You don't need to touch it, But if you do, the frame will hum a little. And here's your historical fact. The window was originally part of the old observatory tower, salvaged after a lightning strike shattered its dome. Instead of being discarded, the window was placed here by a group of weavers who believed that things that survived storms deserve better views. This obscure tradition, once a year on a night called the Return of Almost, people would take turns standing at the window. They'd whisper a regret, then write down the version they saw through the glass, not as a wish but as a reminder of softness. Many of those writings were later turned into lullabies. Some are still hummed today. Historians still debate whether the window's visions were illusion, ritualized empathy, or a very elegant act of collective forgiveness. Now you look through it once more. Well, the scene hasn't changed. Well, but your chest has. The shadow of a calendula rests softly across the lower pane. Well, you step back. And smile not for what could have been, but for what's still becoming. Though the city is winding down now, not collapsing, not concluding, just slowing, like a heartbeat settling into the rhythm of dream. You walk along a corridor lined with low lanterns, each glowing like a held breath. The path leads you to a quiet plaza, open to the sky, empty but for a single stone arch. Beneath it hangs a bell, small, tarnished silver, no rope, no hammer. Though this is the bell that only rang for sleep. No one rang it, not directly. It sounded only when someone in the city, whether child or elder or visitor, finally surrendered to true rest. Not just exhaustion, not just closing your eyes, but real rest, the kind that comes when the world has finally asked nothing of you. You stand in the center of the plaza, a breeze moves past you barely, a hush lines in, and then, ding. It's not loud, it's not bright, it's just perfect. A single, rounded note that slips under your ribs and settles behind your sternum like warm water. It rang for you. Because for just a moment, just now, you let go. Here's your historical fact. The bell was cast from melted jewelry and tools donated by over 200 citizens, most of whom refused to say why. The city smith said it was the easiest mold he'd ever poured. The metal knew where to go. This obscure ritual, every time the bell rang, someone in the city would place a calendula petal in a glass bowl near the center of the plaza. The petals were never counted. But once someone whispered, when the bowl fills, the bell will stop ringing. Not forever, just until we remember to rest again. Now, no one knows who said it. And historians still debate whether the bell was connected to the wind, the heartbeat of the city, or merely the quietest parts of ourselves that know when we are safe enough to sleep. You don't sit. You don't move. You let the sound ring through you. And you imagine if the world had a bedtime voice, it might sound just like this. The bell has stopped ringing, not abruptly, just faded like a lullaby turning the last page. You walk now without needing to choose a direction. The city carries you. Your feet move softly over paths that feel less like stone and more like old fabric, gently laid out for someone returning home. You pass an open gate that leads nowhere in particular, just space. Wild space. Beyond it, a field. Except you blink and it's not a field anymore. Oh, it's a garden. A garden that doesn't seem to be there exactly. But you remember it. You remember it so clearly that your chest aches in the way it does when something too soft brushes an old bruise. The air smells like lavender and cut grass, with a hint of rain that hasn't arrived yet. Flowers you've never seen, and yet somehow recognize, bloom across invisible rows. This is the garden that grew only in memory. It was never planted, never watered. It simply existed where memory met imagination. Each person saw something different when they entered. For some, it was rows of calendula, tall and golden. For others, it was rosemary bushes and lemon trees. For a few, it was just dirt, warm and honest. You kneel and press your hand into the soil. It's not soil, not really, but it feels like home. Now here's your historical fact. The garden was once a failed orchard. The trees never bore fruit, the flowers refused to root. And so the space was left alone until people began to return to it, not to fix it, but to remember it as if it had bloomed. Over time, they began describing it to each other. What they'd seen, what they wished had grown there. And slowly that shared memory took shape not on the land but inside the city's soul. This obscure practice. Once a year, citizens have gathered here for the imagining, where they closed their eyes and planted a memory they hadn't lived yet. A child running through basil leaves. An old friend sitting beneath a plum tree. A version of themselves humming as they pulled weeds beside someone they loved. People left nothing behind in this garden. That was the point. Historians still debate whether the garden was metaphorical, metaphysical, or simply the most successful failure in city history. You sit and the garden grows around you, not with roots but with recollections. And you remember something you haven't done yet. And it's beautiful. And it's enough. You stand again, and the garden lingers on your clothes like memory clings to fabric. A path opens without sound, just a slight suggestion of direction in the way the wind gathers itself and moves forward. You follow. Eventually, you reach a clearing. Nothing remarkable except for the object standing in the center. A tall, tarnished mirror in a stone frame, surrounded by nothing but grass and evening light. This is the mirror that refused to show you alone. You approach slowly. The glass is dulled with age, soft at the edges as if even its reflections are tired of precision. You look in. And there you are. But not just you. Standing just beside your shoulder, just behind your gaze, are the outlines of others. Blurred, warm silhouettes, not ghosts, not tricks of the light. Just the suggestion that you've never been as alone as you sometimes felt. Of every kindnesses, of every shared silences, Of every hand that once hesitated, then reached for yours. Well, they're here, not crowding you, not haunting you, just accompanying you. You lean in closer, and the reflection doesn't sharpen, it softens. You see the lines on your face that no one else notices. The curve of your mouth when it's not performing. The eyes that still search for gentleness even when pretending they don't need it. Now here's your historical fact. This mirror was originally part of the city's oldest orphanage. The founder insisted on placing it where every child would see themselves surrounded by warmth, real or imagined. Let no reflection show them empty, she said. When the building was dismantled, the mirror remained. This obscure tradition, when a person passed away their loved ones would visit the mirror in silence. It was said that for one day, just one, you'd be able to see the person again, not clearly, not completely, but just enough to believe they hadn't entirely left. Sometimes people came and saw themselves as they had once been, and that was just as comforting. Now, historians still debate whether the mirror was enchanted, empathetic, or simply a place where the city whispered, "You are held." Well, you don't cry, but your shoulders relax in a way they haven't in a long time. And for once, seeing yourself doesn't feel like looking at a stranger. It feels like returning to a self that never stopped waiting for you. You stand now at the very edge of where the city forgets itself. The mirror fades behind you. The garden has dissolved into memory. The bell has quieted into stillness. And ahead, nothing. Not a wall, not a gate. Just the open sky draped over the earth like a shawl on tired shoulders. Though this space has no name. But those who returned from it, if they ever spoke at all, called it. Though the place where stops whispering. Though you step forward. The ground beneath you is soft and uneven, like fabric bunched beneath a sleeping body. The air no longer smells of calendula or dust or wood smoke. It smells like something much older, recognition. Now there is no wind, no sound. But you feel the entire city behind you, not abandoned, not left, simply settled. Like a book still open on the last page, unread, but no longer unfinished. All you said, and sits with you. Here's your final historical fact, never sought attention. It was rarely mentioned in trade logs, never appeared on the great maps. Its people didn't write manifestos or carve declarations into marble. They told stories to the wind and trusted the petals of calendula to carry them. And still the city endured. Because some places do not need to be remembered to exist. Though they only need to be felt. This obscure final tradition, when someone knew they were ready to leave, whether through death or simply through the quiet ache of moving on, they would not say goodbye. Instead, they would place a calendula petal in their shoe and walk until the shadow of it vanished. If it did not vanish, they stayed. If it did, they never looked back. Not because they forgot, but because they had been filled. Historians still debate whether was ever real. but they never question whether it mattered. Because people still dream of flower shadows. People still pause before they finish sentences. People still fall asleep to the sound of silence folded in stone. And somewhere beneath your ribs, the city keeps humming. Not loudly, or just enough to remind you. You do not need to be productive to be worthy. You do not need to be seen to be loved. You do not need to be whole to be held. You're already part of a story that doesn't need to end. You are already inside the place you thought you had to find. You are already home. Now, I settle deeper into the quiet. I feel the air where the words once were. I feel your weight soften across the bed or the chair or the place you've come to rest. Let your breath slow not because you're forcing it, but because you've run out of reasons to hurry. Though there are no clocks here. No gates to close. Only a city that built itself from softness. And trusted you to arrive exactly when you were ready. You don't need to remember everything. Just the way this moment feels. Let your eyelids grow heavier than thought. Let the hush settle into your chest. The petals have stopped falling. Though the wind has folded its arms. And in the shadows, those quiet golden shapes have lain down beside you like friends who will keep watch through the night. You are not lost. You never were. You've just come to rest where time was never a requirement. Welcome to sleep. Welcome to stillness. Welcome to good night.